5 miles below the Pacific, deeper than the Titanic, lies a shattered ship with one impossible detail: a command tower on the wrong side. This is not just any wreck. It is the lost Flagship that led the attack on Pearl Harbor, missing for 81 years, despite precise wartime records. So how could Japan's most infamous carrier vanish for generations? And what deadly flaw sealed its fate? The answers begin where Akagi's radical design first defied history and ultimately set her on a course for disaster. On December 6, 1920, Japanese shipbuilders laid the keel for a vessel intended to be a battle cruiser, fast and heavily armed, built to chase down enemy raiders across the Pacific. 2 years later, in 1922, the Washington Naval Treaty redrew the rules of naval power. Battleships and battle cruisers under construction were ordered scrapped, their steel to be recycled or left to rust. Japan's Navy, facing limits it never expected, refused to abandon the project. Instead, a team of naval architects proposed a transformation that was almost unthinkable at the time: convert the unfinished hull into an aircraft carrier. The result was Akagi, a ship that broke with tradition at every turn. Instead of a single flat deck, Akagi featured 3 stacked flight decks, an engineering gamble designed to launch and recover aircraft at the same time. The lower 2 decks were short, reserved for takeoffs, while the top deck handled both launches and landings. This arrangement was meant to multiply strike power, but in practice it proved awkward and dangerous. Pilots struggled with limited space and swirling winds between the decks. Maintenance crews faced constant hazards, squeezed between battleship strength armor and fragile hangar walls. Still, the conversion pushed Japan's Navy into new territory. Akagi became a prototype for carrier warfare, part experiment, part weapon, and a symbol of determination to outmaneuver treaty restrictions. The lessons learned from her radical 3-deck design would soon force a complete rethink. But in the mid-1920s, Akagi stood as the boldest answer to an international treaty no one in Japan had wanted. By the mid-1930s, Akagi's experimental 3-deck layout had outlived its usefulness. Japan's Navy demanded more firepower, faster launches, and a carrier that could keep pace with the era's growing ambitions. In 1935, Akagi entered dry dock for a complete transformation. Her triple flight decks vanished, replaced by a single sweeping deck stretching the length of the ship. Aircraft capacity soared. Now over 90 planes could be housed and launched, nearly doubling her original strength. New turbines pushed her top speed to 31.5 knots, making her one of the fastest capital ships afloat. But the most unusual feature stood out even against these upgrades. Akagi's island superstructure was rebuilt on the port side. No other fleet carrier in the world followed this blueprint. The reason was tactical, not aesthetic. With Akagi's island on the left and her sister ship, Kaga's, on the right, both could operate side by side, launching and recovering aircraft without colliding air traffic. This mirrored arrangement gave the Japanese carrier strike force a unique operational rhythm. Yet the overhaul came with hidden costs. The massive new flight deck rested on the original battlecruiser frame, which had never been designed for the heat and stress of aviation fuel fires or the shock of internal explosions. Underneath the armored deck, hangars and passageways remained vulnerable, their steel bulkheads thin compared to a battleship's. This compromise, more planes and more speed, but less protection, would later haunt Akagi in the chaos of combat. The ship that emerged from the rebuild was more powerful than ever, but with weaknesses no one would notice until it was too late. At 7:15 in the morning on June 4th, 1942, a single order from Vice Admiral Nagumo set in motion a chain of events that would leave Akagi fatally exposed. The reconnaissance flights had returned with troubling reports. Enemy ships, possibly carriers, were now somewhere to the northeast. Japanese doctrine demanded a rapid, coordinated response, but the system in place was rigid. Planes already prepped for land attack needed to be rearmed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs for a naval strike. That meant every aircraft had to be brought below decks, drained of fuel, and stripped of ordnance in tight, crowded hangars. Below Akagi's vast flight deck, the hangar decks became a hive of activity. Mechanics rolled out bombs and torpedoes, stacking them in rows along the steel floors. Fuel lines snaked between parked aircraft, filling tanks in preparation for the next strike. There was no room for error. One spark could ignite everything. The process was not designed for flexibility. Doctrine dictated that all planes be rearmed together, not piecemeal. Deck crews had to wait until every aircraft from the first wave landed before they could even start. Only then did the real work begin, with bombs, torpedoes, and gasoline brought out into the open, side by side with men working quickly but methodically. The hangar's steel bulkheads, thin compared to a battleship's, offered little protection against fire or explosion. Akagi's original battlecruiser skeleton had never been meant to handle such volatile loads. As the minutes ticked by, the carrier's decks filled with armed planes, exposed ordnance, and volatile fuel vapors. The ship had become a powder keg, one that would not survive the next crisis. At 10:22 a.m., 3 American dive bombers from USS Enterprise broke through the haze above Akagi. Lieutenant Commander Richard Best, flying at nearly 20,000 feet, lined up his Dauntless and released a single 1,000-pound bomb. It punched through the flight deck just behind the midship elevator, right where crews had parked fueled and armed aircraft, surrounded by torpedoes and open gasoline lines. The explosion below deck was instant and overwhelming. Aviation fuel ignited in a flash, sending fire racing through hangars and corridors. Ordnance began to cook off. Within minutes, secondary explosions tore through the heart of the ship. Steel bulkheads buckled and rivets burst as pressure waves ripped through the lower decks. The flight deck sagged, then collapsed into the inferno below. Smoke poured from every opening, turning daylight to dusk across the carrier's length. Damage control teams fought to contain the blaze, but the heat was too intense and the fires too widespread. Ammunition stores detonated, sending shockwaves through the hull. Vice Admiral Nagumo and his staff abandoned the bridge, evacuating to the destroyer Nawaki. Still, Akagi refused to sink. For nearly 19 hours, flames gutted her from within, while the Pacific lapped against her battered sides. Finally, at 5:20 a.m. on June 5th, 4 Japanese destroyers moved into position. They fired torpedoes at point-blank range into the listing hull. 2 or 3 struck home. The carrier slipped beneath the waves stern first, taking 263 of her crew with her. The flagship that had led the Pearl Harbor attack was gone, erased in a single day by a chain of decisions and one perfectly placed bomb. The search for Akagi's final resting place spanned decades, with each new expedition chasing a set of wartime coordinates that always seemed just out of reach. In 2019, sonar from Paul Allen's research vessel, Petrel, swept a section of the Pacific nearly 1,300 miles northwest of Midway Atoll. The sonar image revealed a massive shape, 855 feet long, with a silhouette unmistakably carrier style, and a superstructure on the port side. But sonar alone was not enough. In September 2023, Ocean Exploration Trust's remotely operated vehicle, Atalanta, descended more than 5,400 meters, deeper than the Titanic, to the ocean floor at 30 degrees 30 minutes north, 178 degrees 40 minutes west. Cameras sent back the first clear images: a broken hull, a collapsed flight deck, and the unique portside island. For the first time in 81 years, Akagi was confirmed, her identity sealed by features no other ship possessed. The mystery of her disappearance was finally over. The final survey of Akagi's wreck provides a forensic answer to a debate that lasted generations. The forward hull lies largely intact, confirming that the bomb which struck her did not punch through to the bow. Instead, the midsection is vaporized, steel ripped apart from within. The decks collapsed into the hangar bays. This pattern matches eyewitness accounts of aviation fuel and armed aircraft igniting below decks, setting off a chain of internal explosions. Along the lower starboard hull, 4 clean breaks in the plating line. Up with scuttling torpedoes, fired by Japanese destroyers at 5:20 in the morning on June 5th, 1942. The evidence leaves no doubt. American bombs and fire made survival impossible, but it was Japanese torpedoes that sent Akagi to the bottom. Today, the wreck rests under 18,000 feet of water, protected by the Sunken Military Craft Act as sovereign Japanese territory. Akagi remains a war grave, with 263 of her crew still aboard, undisturbed since the day she vanished. Today, Akagi rests in darkness, her wreck a sovereign war grave protected by international law. As technology reveals what time concealed, each discovery forces us to reconsider certainty in history. The ocean remembers what nations forget. Even the most powerful legacies vanish, but consequences endure. Share your thoughts below.